History is paved with the bones of those who died for a God they never saw, killed by men who claim to speak for the divine. And if you listen closely to the echoes of the past, you can hear the sharpening of swords against the grinding stone of Scripture. We often look at religion as a source of comfort, a moral compass, or a community of believers seeking the transcendent. But beneath the incense and the hymns lies a much darker, colder reality that has shaped the borders of our maps and the bloodlines of our kings, the realization that faith is the ultimate political lever. It begins not with a whisper of peace, but with the thunder of a chariot in ancient Mesopotamia, where the first kings realized that ruling by strength alone was exhausting and precarious. For a strong man can always be killed by a stronger one, but a man chosen by the gods becomes untouchable. This was the first great innovation in political technology, the moment when the crown and the altar were fused into a single terrifying monolith. In ancient Sumer and Egypt, there was no separation between church and state, because the state was the church. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a living deity, a bridge between the chaotic mortal world and the eternal order of the cosmos, meaning that to disobey a tax collector was not just a crime, it was a heresy that threatened to unbalance the universe itself. This brilliance of weaponizing the metaphysical transformed obedience from a civic duty into a spiritual necessity, creating a system of control so total that it required no standing police force to monitor every thought, for the gods were always watching. As we move across the sands of time to the rise of monotheism, the weapon becomes sharper, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. Because while polytheism allowed for a chaotic marketplace of deities, where a conquered people could simply add the victor's god to their own pantheon, monotheism introduced the concept of exclusive truth. This was a radical and violent shift in the political landscape, because if there is only one true God, then all others are demons or delusions, and the people who worship them are not just foreigners, they are enemies of the truth itself. We see this crystallized in the story of the Roman Empire, a civilization that had spent centuries persecuting Christians only to realize under the pragmatic and ruthless gaze of Emperor Constantine that this new faith was actually the perfect glue for a fracturing empire. When Constantine looked up at the sun before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and supposedly saw the Chi Rho symbol with the words, "In this sign conquer," he wasn't just having a spiritual awakening, he was discovering a political strategy that would dominate Europe for 1,000 years. By adopting Christianity, Rome didn't surrender, it rebranded, swapping the eagle for the cross and turning the pacifist teachings of Jesus into the imperial doctrine of a superpower. The Council of Nicaea, often framed as a theological debate about the nature of Christ, was in reality a political summit designed to standardize belief, for an empire cannot function if its citizens are fighting over the definition of the divine. This was the moment the church became an arm of the state, and heresy became a treason punishable by death, setting a precedent that would bleed through the centuries. As the Roman structure collapsed in the West, the weapon of religion did not rust, it was picked up by the Germanic kings and the papacy, who entered into a symbiotic and often venomous dance of power. The coronation of Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD was the ultimate theater of this union, a message to the world that power comes from God through the church, thereby making the Pope a kingmaker. But this weapon was double-edged, as seen in the investiture controversy, where popes and emperors fought bitter political wars over who had the right to appoint bishops, not because they cared about the sanctity of the office, but because bishops controlled vast lands, armies, and tax revenues. The Crusades serve as the most visceral example of religion as a political distraction, a brilliant geopolitical maneuver by Pope Urban II to stop the infighting of European knights who were tearing the continents apart. By pointing a finger toward the east and declaring Deus Vult, he transformed the violent, predatory energy of the feudal warrior class into a holy mission, effectively exporting Europe's violence to the Holy Land, while consolidating papal power at home. It was a masterclass in unifying a fractured political landscape by creating a common enemy, a tactic that remains a staple of political playbooks to this day. Yet, the weaponization of faith was not unique to Christendom. Across the world, the story rhymed. In the Islamic world, the split between Sunni and Shia began as a political dispute over succession, who was the rightful heir to the political authority of the prophet. But it hardened into a theological divide that has been exploited by empires, from the Ottomans and Safavids to modern nation-states, using sectarian identity as a rallying cry to mobilize armies and define borders. The Safavid conversion of Iran to Shi'ism in the 16th century was a deliberate political calculation to distinguish their empire from their Sunni Ottoman rivals to the west and the Mughals to the east, creating a distinct national identity forged in the fires of religious difference. Meanwhile, in the Americas, the Aztec Empire practiced a form of state terrorism disguised as theology, where the flower wars were waged not to conquer land, but to capture victims for sacrifice, a brutal display of power designed to keep subject states in a perpetual state of terror and submission, reinforcing the idea that the sun would literally cease to rise if the political order was overturned. The arrival of the Spanish conquistadors brought a clash of two weaponized faiths, where the cross was used to justify a genocide under the guise of saving souls. The Requerimiento, a document read by Spanish invaders to uncomprehending indigenous populations, demanded submission to the Catholic Church and the Spanish crown, effectively legalizing conquest and enslavement in the eyes of European law. It was a legalistic fiction that allowed the plunder of a continent to be framed as a pious act of charity. As Europe fractured during the Reformation, religion became the defining feature of the emerging nation-state, but the wars that followed were rarely about doctrine alone. The 30 Years' War, which devastated Central Europe, is often remembered as a religious conflict, but a closer look reveals the cynical machinery of power beneath the surface. We see Catholic France, led by the Cardinal Richelieu, a prince of the church, funding Protestant armies to kill Catholic Habsburgs, proving once and for all that when the chips are down, strategic interest trumps theological loyalty. Richelieu understood that the true god of the state is survival and dominance, and he was willing to burn the altars of his own faith to ensure the supremacy of France. This era gave birth to the principle of cuius regio eius religion, whose realm his religion, which codified the idea that a subject's conscience belonged to their ruler, turning faith into a marker of national loyalty rather than personal conviction. In England, Henry VIII's break with Rome had almost nothing to do with theological disagreement, and everything to do with sovereignty, dynastic succession, and the immense wealth held in the monasteries. By declaring himself the head of the church, Henry nationalized the divine, seizing the assets of the clergy to fund his navy and his wars, showing that the Reformation was as much a massive transfer of wealth as it was a spiritual awakening. As the Enlightenment dawned and the intellectual elite began to question the existence of God, one might expect the weapon to lose its edge, but instead it evolved. The divine right of kings was replaced by the civilizing mission of empires, a secularized version of religious mandate where the European powers felt justified in dominating the globe, not necessarily to save souls, but to spread Christian civilization, a vague blend of cultural superiority and moralistic paternalism that greased the wheels of colonial extraction. In the 19th and 20th centuries, we see the terrifying synthesis of religious fervor and modern nationalism. The Russian czars used orthodoxy as a pillar of their autocracy, framing themselves as the protectors of all Christians in the Ottoman Empire as a pretext for expansionist wars in the Crimea and the Balkans. Even in the secular ideologies of the 20th century, the structures of religious control were mimicked. The cults of personality around figures like Stalin or Mao borrowed heavily from religious iconography, demanding a faith-like devotion to the state and its infallibility, proving that the human need to worship can be weaponized even in the absence of a god. In the modern era, we witness the rise of fundamentalism, not merely as a return to tradition, but as a thoroughly modern political reaction to the failures of secular governance and the anxieties of globalization. Whether it is the rise of the religious right in the United States, which welded evangelical Christianity to a specific political platform, or the Islamist movements in the Middle East that emerged to fill the vacuum left by failed secular Arab nationalism, the pattern remains the same. Political grievances are dressed in holy robes to render them unassailable. When a political leader frames a policy debate as a struggle between good and evil, they are borrowing the ancient sword of the priesthood, attempting to bypass rational debate and tap into the primal, tribal instincts that religion governs. The Northern Ireland conflict, often shorthanded as Catholic versus Protestant, was a complex struggle over colonial history, civil rights, and national identity, yet the religious labels served as convenient uniforms for the opposing sides, turning neighbors into enemies based on the church they attended. In India, the partition of 1947 carved a subcontinent along religious lines, creating wounds that fester to this day, as modern political parties continue to stoke communal tensions to secure vote banks, proving that the colonial strategy of divide and rule has been internalized by the post-colonial state. The tragedy of this weaponization is that it hollows out the faith it claims to protect, turning the complex, often paradoxical search for meaning into a flat, binary tool of us versus them. It takes the texts that speak of mercy, charity, and humility and cherry-picks the verses of war and judgment, constructing a theology of power that serves the interests of the elite while demanding the sacrifice of the poor. The suicide bomber, the Crusader Knight, and the Inquisitor are all products of the same assembly line, manufactured by political actors who understand that men will do for God what they would never do for a mere mortal. They will burn cities, starve children, and destroy themselves if they believe it is the will of the Almighty. And this terrifying capacity for self-sacrifice is what makes religion the nuclear option in the arsenal of political control. From the divine winds of the Japanese kamikaze who died for a god emperor, to the manifest destiny of American settlers pushing west, the logic is consistent. Our expansion is sanctioned by the heavens, and our enemies are impediments to a divine plan. As we look at the world today with its resurgence of religious nationalism and sectarian violence, we must recognize that we are not witnessing a clash of civilizations as much as a clash of political elites using the oldest trick in the book. The narrative of religious war is often a cover for conflicts over water, oil, land, and legitimacy. The cynical genius of this weapon is that it makes compromise impossible. You can negotiate over territory, you can split a sum of money, but you cannot negotiate with the will of God. By framing political conflicts in cosmic terms, leaders ensure that the war can never truly end, for the enemy is not just a rival, but an embodiment of evil. This ensures a perpetual state of mobilization, a constant wartime footing that allows for the suppression of dissent and the centralization of authority. The history of the world is, in many ways, the history of this deception, a long, bloody chronicle of how the profound human impulse to connect with the infinite has been hijacked to serve the very finite desires of the powerful. It is a story of how the cross, the crescent, and the star have been stitched onto flags and painted onto tanks, transforming symbols of transcendence into trademarks of tribalism. To understand the history of warfare and governance, one must look past the theology and see the sociology, to understand that when a king kneels before a bishop, he is not just showing piety, he is engaging in a transaction of legitimacy. The bishop gets protection, and the king gets the keys to the human soul. This alliance has survived revolutions, reformations, and the rise of science, adapting to every new age with the fluidity of water. It reminds us that while the names of the gods may change, the altar of power remains the same. And as long as there are men who wish to rule over others, they will reach for the weapon that makes their word law and their power divine. The documentary of human civilization is incomplete without acknowledging this shadow, this persistent manipulation of the sacred for the profane. It is a sobering realization that the most destructive wars in human history were often fought in the name of the Prince of Peace, a paradox that reveals the terrifying effectiveness of religion when it is stripped of its spirituality and forged into a blade. As we stand in the modern world, surrounded by the rhetoric of holy wars and spiritual battles, we are witnessing the latest chapter in a story that began in the ziggurats of Sumer, a story that warns us that the most dangerous place on earth is the intersection of the pulpit and the throne.